So we were speaking about, of course, this big theme of this chapter 7 in Tanya, which is the theme of Klipat Noga, what he calls the luminescent husk, or the light that has a peel covering it. And it's our duty really to unpeel this peel in order to cover the light. And of course, this is referring to, as we've mentioned now quite a few times, the neutral realm of this world. Many parts of our lives are in the neutral realm, like eating, sleeping, and so on. And if we can use those activities towards holiness, to do good, then we can elevate them. And in a way, that's really the purpose of life altogether. We were also speaking last week about these 4 worlds and how this world really is has a majority that is hidden, unlike other worlds that are fully revealed, like the first world, the world of emanation, the world of Atzilut. And in a way, this idea of elevating the Klipat Noga, of channeling it towards holiness, really speaks of our duty in this world to uncover much of the hidden parts of this world that hide God's light by, again, transforming the Klipat Noga into good. And in a way, we can then turn this world, transform this world in a world like the Olam Atzilut, like the world of emanation, and even more so than that. Okay, let's continue like you suggested. Thank you, Margot, on page 178, opening the Tanya. Does anyone want to read? Anyone?
Yeah, I can read if you want.
Thank you.
Good.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. As the author discussed in chapter 1, the people of Israel possess the traits of bashfulness, compassion, and charity, not as qualities of their godly souls, but as part of their nature, deriving from the animal soul. But, I had moved the book. Just as a certain family or race might hereditarily possess the trait of aggression or a talent for writing poetry, the Jew possesses these traits not as a part of his natural biological composition and not as a result of the holiness of his godly soul. Shall I keep going?
Yeah, please keep going. Just to clarify, so again, these 3 traits of bashfulness, compassion, and charity are traits that are not necessarily godly. I mean, they could be used, of course, for godliness, right? But they are traits that come from our genetics, maybe, or from what we inherited as Jews. But that's the point. Let's continue, and then we'll develop this idea. Let's go. Sorry.
Okay. Citing the verse, "Who teaches us from the beasts of the land and wisens us from the birds of the sky," the Talmud explains that certain possessive traits that, had the Torah not been given, we could have learned from animals. Modesty from the cat, respect of another property from the ant, and so on. Figuratively speaking, and in a certain sense, the positive traits of the animal soul of the Jew can be compared to the positive traits of these animals. However, the modesty of the cat, which covers its excrement, is not a result of the cat's awareness of the divine omnipresence impelling it to modesty. It is part of the cat's immutable nature. Cat may also do that to protect itself from anybody bothering it.
Right.
By the same token, one might learn the practice of netilat yadayim, the ritual washing of the hands, from the raccoon, which seems to wash its hands in water before eating. But the raccoon does not do this because it's mandated by the Shulchan Aruch. This is not a practice deriving from a godly soul's desire to fulfill the divine will, but an inherited characteristic in the nature of a particular animal. In a certain sense, the good traits of the Jews are like the good traits of these animals.
Right. Okay. So I think this is quite profound and connects to this idea that one may be doing good all day long, but it's simply because of his natural traits, and he's not in a way connecting to that which is beyond him. He's connecting to himself. So part of himself likes to wash hands because you might be OCD, or you might just be doing the Tilat Yadayim, washing your hands before eating bread because you're careful about it, but you're not doing it for the mitzvah, and therefore you are not really connecting to the mitzvah, to the commander of the mitzvah, to God himself, by doing these acts. Is it bad that you do them in such a way? Not necessarily, but in a way it misses the point, because the point again is to be able to connect to divinity, to connect to that which is greater than us, and transform this world into a place, into a dwelling place for God, so to speak. If I'm only connecting to myself, I'm creating a dwelling place for me, but not for God. And then we may be acting like these animals. These animals have positive traits. Cats are modest, and raccoons are clean, or at least they wash hands. I don't know if they clean. And ants respect the property of others, and so on. But they do that at the end of the day for themselves, and many human beings do that for themselves. You know, it reminds me of Abraham. Abraham, by nature, was a man of kindness, right? Our forefather, we read about his kindness in the Midrash, in the Torah, how he would welcome guests and he would go the extra mile to be kind to someone else. And God gave him a bunch of tests, 10 altogether. It is only at the 10th test that God tells him, now know that you are God-fearing. Now, what was the 10th test? The 10th test was a test for Abraham to go against his nature. It was the test in which God told Abraham to go take his son Isaac and go and sacrifice him. We all know it did not happen. Then it was just a test, and at the very last second, God sent an angel to stop Abraham from sacrificing his son. But after he attempts to sacrifice him and he passes this test, God says to him, Ki ata yadati ki yireh Elokim ata. To quote the verse, now I know that you are God-fearing. Of course, the commentaries jump on this verse and say, now, Abraham, your loyal servant, you've given him 9 tests thus far, and now the 10th one, only now you know that he's God-fearing? What's wrong with you, God? He's one of the most devoted people we read about in history to you. Now you know. And some of the Kabbalistic commentaries indeed explain that maybe many of these other tests that he had were simply in line with his nature, were tests of kindness. So yes, certainly Abraham did them for God, but it wasn't as clear as the sunlight. Maybe he did them just because it's his nature. So really not for God. When he was asked to go against his nature, not to be kind, to sacrifice his son, to go the other way, to be as severe as it gets, and he passed that test, then God said, okay, now I know for sure, because you're not doing it just for me. You're not doing just things that are in line with your nature. You are doing things that are also that go against your nature for you. For God. And that proves to God that now he knows. Now, by the way, that's why I think, just to translate these words into some practical idea, I think that's why it's good for everyone, every day even, or at least once a week, well, before we go to this practical tool, first, it's good for everyone to examine themselves, and to ask themselves, what is indeed my nature? Am I more a person like Abraham of kindness, or maybe like his son Isaac, who was the opposite, more of a person that's an introvert and of severity and of maybe self-reflection? What type of person am I? And once you realize what your nature is, I think it's good. This is what this may be alluding to also. I think it's good for a person to think, well, is there something that I can do that goes against my nature just for God himself? Is there a mitzvah that I can do that is not aligned with my nature? Say I'm not a person of kindness. To give tzedakah for me is easy. You know what is hard for me? What is hard for me is to say no. To say no to things that are bad for me. Do I have the ability to do that? Maybe I should do that. Maybe not every single time, but maybe at least once, so that I know that I'm doing this for God. Or the opposite. Maybe I am a man that it's very hard for me to be charitable or to be kind. Some people are born that way. So maybe once a day I should go against that nature and be kind to someone else. Maybe I don't like hanging around with people. Maybe I'm the type of guy who likes to sit behind a computer all day long. And that's fine, because there are people like that. But again, once a day, we should try and go interact with a person like that. If you are a man that is an introvert by nature, again, to prove that the mitzvahs that you are doing are not just for yourself, but really for God himself. and therefore you're willing to even go against your nature to perform that.
Do you do that to prove it to yourself or to prove it to God?
I think both. I think both. That's a good question. I think both. And now what's interesting is that the more you do it, the more your nature in a way changes and is the more your nature in a way becomes God with one with God. It becomes a channel of godliness. I would use again as an example the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was known to be a very, very, very private person. And when his late father-in-law was his predecessor, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away, they begged him to become the next Rebbe, and he said, "No, I'm sorry, it's against my nature." He wasn't a person who liked to interact with people, and if he needed to, he had to, and he felt that this was his God-given duty, and then he would. But otherwise, if it was up to him, he would remain in his room studying Torah all day long, and maybe, issuing all these new Torah ideas for the world to read. But again, he wouldn't interact much with people. But he went against his nature. I heard this from Rabbi Steinsaltz himself. He knew the Lubavitcher Rebbe quite well. He went against his nature because he felt that that's what God needed him to do. So at that moment, as Rabbi Steinsaltz put it, I'm going to quote verbatim, that the minute the Rebbe became a Rebbe, he ceased to be. He himself, as an individual, a person, ceased to be. From that moment, he said, okay, it's not about me, it's about what's asked of me, even if it goes against my nature. And he changed his whole life in a way to fulfill that. And of course, thank God, because he was one of the most impactful people in our generation, in a good sense, of course. But maybe we can't change our whole lives, but we can at least do one mitzvah a day that changes our nature for God, to prove it both to ourselves and to God, like you were saying, Margaret. And it's not an easy thing also. But otherwise, then in a way, I mean, I hate to compare it to Rabbi Steinsaltz does, page 178. Then we might just be like animals. So we're good, we don't harm anybody, and we clean if we're like raccoons, and we're modest if we're like cats, and we respect people's properties if we're like ants. But at the end of the day, so what's the big difference between us and animals? Not much. But if we do things that are against our nature for God, that's when animals can't do that. Human beings can. And in a way, it's asked of us.
If I can make a comment
Please,
about
the
passing on the leaderships. In some Hasidic dynasties, there's big battles between sons who should lead the next, the next generation,
right.
And they split their organizations. In this case, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, his eldest daughter was married and had a husband, and many believe that he should be the leader.
Right.
And that's why I think the Lubavitcher, the last Lubavitcher backed down, because he had respect that, he didn't want to split the organization, and maybe the other person, being the oldest son-in-law or the son-in-law of the eldest daughter, maybe he deserved to have that right. So, but when the people asked him to take it, then his brother-in-law accepted it, then he accepted the leadership.
Right. I mean, I will say this, that part of the people who wanted the older brother-in-law to take it was the Rebbe himself. But at the end, the older brother-in-law considered that the younger brother-in-law, who was the Rebbe, really is the one that would fit best the position. And they remained very, very close, by the way. Very, very close, which is really should be a model for many other Hasidic groups, like you were saying, unfortunately. And I'm no maven in this, so I don't want to judge, God forbid. But it seems like in our generation, many of the older generation Rebbes passed away, and the Hasidic groups split. because the sons didn't get along, and all of a sudden you have now a huge division in the Hasidic group. Many Hasidic groups are like that today. And it's chaval in a way, at least on the outside. It seems like it's a pity. Yeah.
Rabbi,
Yes, Jordan.
regarding the Rebbe, is this the first time or the longest time that there has not been a formal successor?
I think so. I'm not so knowledgeable in the history. I do know that there was a time after Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitch Rebbe, passed away. It was also very long, but I think it was 18 to 20 years. Now it's been, what, 25 years? 1994. Yeah, so what's 1994? 2004, yeah, much more, almost 30 years, right? That the Rebbe passed away. Yes, I think it has been the longest. Yeah.
But the Breslov rabbi,
Oh, that's right.
his
So
Hasidic
Breslov.
movement continued after his death.
Right.
They called him the Toite, how do
Yeah.
they call it? The Toite.
Not sure.
Yeah.
Right.
So that movement continues today without a leader.
That's right. That's right. That's right. The Breslov movement
The
is a
Toite
very big
Rebbe,
movement.
yeah.
That's right. And they continued that. It's been 200 years, even more, that Rabbi Nachman, their Rebbe, passed away, and they continue to thrive. But I would say that this is connected. I mean, it's not so connected yet to the Tanya, but Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory speaks about the difference between power and influence. It has a lot to do with Hanukkah, by the way. He says that in general, there are two types of leaders: leaders of power and leaders of influence. What's the difference between the two? Leaders of power, the more power they have, the less power you have. It's like dictators. They want to accumulate all the power for themselves, make themselves big, and thereby make you small. But people of power, once they die, their power dies too. And they become a bleep in human history. People of influence, the more influence they have, the more influence they have. The more influence, the bigger their influence is, the bigger they make you. And therefore, once they die, that influence continues to go on and on and on. So the same parallel, I would say, is that it could be drawn between materialistic types of leaders and spiritual types of leaders. Materialistic types of leader who want to take everything from you, from your money to your possession to your, maybe even your way of thinking, are those people of power who, once they die, thank God, then the power dies and you regain some type of power. We've seen that with dictators throughout history. People of influence, when they give something, they don't take, when they try to control, they don't want to take anything, they want to give. And when they give spiritual things. So the more, for example, they teach you love, the more they are filled with love. The more they teach you wisdom, the more they are filled with wisdom. And it's a two-way street, right? So the more they teach you wisdom, the more you too are filled with wisdom. The more they become filled with wisdom. Therefore, they become big and you become big. So how is it connected to Hanukkah? I would say Hanukkah is the festival of lights, we call it, right? And if you think about this, there's a halachic, not to get into the intricate details, but there's a halachic argument between Rav and Shmuel, two Talmudic sages, on whether one can take from one light of the menorah and light from that one light a second light. So say I'm on the third night of Hanukkah right now. Can I take, instead of using my shamash, that candle that lights all the other lights, if I don't have a shamash, can I take the third light that I just lit for the third night and use this light to light the second light? Or do I have to take a separate source, a shamash? Can I light from one light to the other? Rav says, no, you can't. Why? Because by taking that third light and lighting the second light, you'll be diminishing the third light. Maybe some olive oil, if you use olive oil, maybe some olive oil will spill when you try and light that second light. Maybe some of the wax will spill. So you'll be diminishing the third light. It's not respectful to the third light, and therefore you shouldn't. Shmuel says, no. So what if you diminish some of the wax, some of the olive oil? At the end of the day, what will you have? Two lights. If I take the third light and light the second light, I'll have two lights. And you'll be increasing light in the world. You won't be diminishing light in the world. If you look at the end result, you'll have two lights. If it's a third night, you'll have eventually three lights. So you are allowed to. Now, by the way, Jewish law follows the opinion of Shmuel. Why? On a deeper level, that's because one may think that if I take my light and use it to light someone else, I'll be diminishing myself. I'll be lowering myself to a different level, and I'll be losing some of my time, my precious, whatever, my precious schedule, my precious wisdom, and maybe contaminating it with going down to someone else's level. We don't follow that opinion. We follow the opinion that if you take your light to someone else, to light someone else, you'll have more light in the world. That's true with influence. It's not true with power. If I take my light, whether it's my wisdom, my kindness, my love, all these spiritual gifts, and connect to someone else with them, then at the end of the day, there's more light, there's more love, there's more kindness in the world. And that's what influence really means. Power means I want to take something. Influence means I want to give something. And when I give something, even if I'm losing some of myself a little bit, or some of my time a little bit, or I'm lowering myself in a way, still, at the end of the day, there's more light in the world. And then you become greater with that, because that light then touches your light, and there's more light in your life. There's more light in the world altogether. That's how it's connected to Hanukkah. And I think it's true. I mean, they say that wisdom comes from experience. Why is that? Because the more you share wisdom, the more you become wise. It's a fact of life. The more you share spiritual gifts, the more you share love, the more you become loving. The more you share kindness, the more you become kind yourself. I experienced that in a miraculous way, as I'm sure many of you did, because I've often been asked the question, you have 10 children, and you really have enough love for each of your children? It's impossible. We can barely hold 2 children, 10 children. And my answer is an answer that I really experience. I don't believe in it, but really it's just a miracle. What's the miracle? And that is that with the birth of each child, a new channel of love opens up in the heart. It's like my heart expands each time. I'm sure all parents can attest to that. Now, why is that? Because when I want when I have a child, and obviously the first parental reaction is just to die for this child, certainly to live for this child, then something inside changes. That's the power of influence. Again, the more we give love, the more we want to give over ourselves to someone else, whether it's to our children or to our spiritual children, then the more our heart swells, the more new channels of love are opened up. That only happens to people of influence, not to people of power. And in a way, that's what rebbes are, that's what spiritual leaders are, and that's what many others are. Not choosing one category over the other, but the more we influence others, and we don't have to be called leaders to do that. Everyone can do that in their own way. But the more we can influence others, the more we change in the process in a good way. And of course, at the end of the day, the more light there is in the world. We follow the opinion of Shmuel. Anyhow.
True.
So that's to relate to that. That's why Rabbi Nachman is still very much alive until today. Why? Because he wasn't a man of power. He's a man of tremendous influence. The Rebbe, it's been 30 years. He's still very much, or a little less, still very much alive today. Again, he was a man of influence. I think any man of influence. And people wonder, how could the Breslev movement be so big? Over 200 years ago, Nachman died. How could the Chabad movement multiply itself after the death of the Rebbe? And by the way, many then, I remember, 1994, that's when he died, June 6, 1994. Many then, on that day, predicted the death of this movement. And logically, rationally, you could say, yes, they had reason to believe that this movement would die, but they didn't understand the mechanics of influence. Mechanics of influence is that it's not like power. It's not like God forbid, I don't know, Tsar Nicholas of Russia or some other dictator. Once they died, thank God, everything that they stood for died. People of influence, again, once they die, their influence only grows from that point on. That's the way influence works. How is it connected to what we're studying about here? I think that it's connected. We can reconnect this to the idea that when we go against our nature in a way, beyond ourselves, to connect to God, and not only to connect to the God out there, but to connect to the God in the world, and more importantly, even to connect to the God in people, that's when this magic of influence happens. So staying with ourselves, with the limits of ourselves, with our own nature, I don't know if that creates so much influence and so much light, therefore. But when we go against our nature, that's when influence really starts to swell and there's much more light in the world. There's a Hanukkah miracle in the world.
Talking about Hanukkah,
Yes.
we also celebrate UFOs during Hanukkah. Unidentified flying objects.
Very good.
Cute, William.
Very good. That's right. It's the unidentified flying object holiday. By the way, yeah, go ahead.
I'll give you another one.
Yeah.
He also goes to his father and says, our neighbor has a nice Christmas tree. Why can't we have one too? So the father thinks about it and he says, the last time we had a burning bush, we were in the desert for 40 years.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Very good. Yeah, it is the frying holiday. And by the way, there's no limit to that frying holiday. Of course, we fry foods, right? Because to remind ourselves of the miracle of the olive oil, that, the cruise of pure olive oil. By the way, people don't know this, but when Judah the Maccabee, after the 3-year war with the Greeks, they were victorious. And when he finally entered the temple to rededicate it, he was searching for a sealed and pure cruise of olive oil. There was plenty of olive oil in the temple. But the Greeks knew that if they would open them up, those cruises of olive oil, or smash them on the ground, then they would become impure. The only olive oil that was allowed to be used in the temple was a cruise of olive oil that was a stamp of, or a container of olive oil that was stamped with the stamp of the high priest. It's that they could not find. That was the only type of olive oil they could use for the menorah. And Judah, of course, searched for it and searched for it and searched for it. That in itself was a miracle, his resilience and his persistence, and eventually found just one little container that was stamped with the priest, with the stamp of the high priest, and was completely sealed. And that's how he was able to light the menorah. And as we all know, it was supposed to light for 1 day and it lasted for 8 days. And therefore we celebrate Hanukkah for 8 days. But that's why we eat fried food. And it's not limited to donuts. It's not limited to latkes. It's not limited to sphinges if you're Moroccan. It's also, I know people who have extra French fries on Hanukkah. Why? Because again, to celebrate the miracle of the oils. Now, consult with your doctor, with your dietitian before you go on these flights of unidentified fried objects. But it's a beautiful way to commemorate this miracle of Hanukkah. Yeah. By the way, the deeper we learned about this in our happiness hour, but the deeper message of the oil, just to go into it and maybe conclude the class with it, is that oil is the only liquid that does not mix with other liquids. Doesn't mix with water, doesn't mix with wine, doesn't mix with vinegar, doesn't mix. It floats above it. And in a way, it reminds us that as we go out to influence in the world and to, add another light or light another light, like we were speaking about, then we have to remind ourselves that, yes, we are in this world, but we're not of this world. We have to be above it. And we have to remain divine. And I always tell my children, especially when they go out in the world, remember, you're the influencer, not the influencee. And that's the olive oil. The oil engages with other liquids maybe, but it also remains above it. So that divinity is not, God forbid, hindered upon or in a way, what's the word, casted. But that's the deeper message.